Let's talk about value. How do you get more value for your money? That's a big thing that we talk about here at Nomad Capitalist because we talk about go where you're treated best. And so if you're looking to live overseas, you might think that there is the live in Chiang Mai, Thailand approach, and that doesn't seem perhaps appealing to you. But then there's also the go and live in London and Dubai and ritzy places and spend a fortune approach, and that may not be where you want to be. There is an alternate approach that my friend and I call the 1.5 world approach. I'm going to share with you how you can use this to maximize your dollar and maximize your lifestyle at the same time. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson, and we talk about living overseas in my book, Nomad Capitalist, in Chapter 3 and all throughout the book. But let's talk about how to maximize not only your cost of living, because if you're coming, as I did, from the US or from another expensive country, you might look at the idea of living overseas as a way to save a few bucks, or at least get more for your bucks than you are now. But you don't want to go all the way to the quote-unquote third world lifestyle that, as some people would call it, probably unfairly, of going and living in a really emerging country. So I faced this myself. Okay, could I afford to go and live in London? Sure. Could I live in Singapore? Sure. For one thing, the immigration requirements are more involved than I necessarily want to get into. So there's not a great value in just me being physically, legally able to go and live in those countries. I'm not really willing to do what they want to do for me to move there, at least at this time. But am I getting a lot of value living in London? I would argue that living in, or going to London for a week or 2 weeks a year is a nice way to get that, Anglo culture, native English speaker vibe. You just talk to people, you make jokes with the waiter, people know where you're coming from culturally. There's a value to that, but to live there, not really. On the other hand, I do like a certain amount of creature comforts. And when I see a lot of 6- and 7-figure entrepreneurs who come to me who, they want to be able to go to Starbucks. They want to be able to go and buy a nice pair of shoes. They want to have consumer options available to them. And that's where this 1.5 world strategy comes into place. It plays off of the old school first world and third world paradigms, which have been they've become shorthand for developed and not so developed. And then people throw in the second world thing where, okay, third world is really terrible. Second world is like a Georgia or an Armenia or Colombia where it's livable, but there's some things missing. And then first world is like what we all aspire to. What 1.5 world is something in between the first and second world. And again, I don't like these terms. They were never really supposed to be so pejorative, but 1.5 world plays into the modern parlance that people are all familiar with, where it's between first and second. I think a perfect example of this is a place I often talk about, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Could I move to Singapore and invest in their government investment program to get permanent residence? Could I go and potentially start a company? Yeah, I could do that. But it's going to be harder to get in. It's going to be a more strict process. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to live there. And if I want to buy an apartment, it's going to cost me $2 million for what I could get for $300,000 or $400,000 in Kuala Lumpur. Now, is Kuala Lumpur as nice as Singapore? Objectively, probably not. My parents came to visit earlier this year. We went to both places, and they said, well, hey, if money were no object, we'd like to live in Singapore. It's a little cleaner, a little more organized. But of course, money is an object. It's always an object. Money is the thing that makes so many people's decisions, right? And in that framework, the value for money, in my opinion, is much better in a place like Kuala Lumpur. We've talked about that before. But putting a label on it, 1.5 world, that my parents are correct. Kuala Lumpur, if I walk down the street here and I go to the aforementioned Starbucks, yeah, there might be a little pile of garbage on the way. Or there may be there's this woman who sits down there in the street who doesn't seem to really be homeless, but acts like she's homeless and just lounges around on her little cardboard box, eating food and listening to an iPhone. Yeah, you wouldn't see that in Singapore. And so if that makes you uncomfortable, then you might say, hey, I want to go to Singapore. But generally speaking, I recently had someone who came to me and said, Andrew, I'd like to move to Kuala Lumpur, just as a specific example, but my wife's not sure because she likes the comforts of Singapore. That's what she feels comfortable with. And I said, well, that's great. But in my 1.5 world, yes, if you go 20 kilometers or 20 miles that way, you might have a different life. But if you live in this bubble of the expat slash nomad capitalist slash successful person bubble, you're not going to notice that much of a difference. Yes, you'll notice a little bit of difference, but it's not even the second world difference. It's not even those kind of middle of the road places that are comfortable, but you are sacrificing some things. In a place like a Kuala Lumpur, you're barely sacrificing anything. You have some of the best malls, you have restaurants, you have all the comforts that you'd find in the quote-unquote first world, just with a few things that aren't quite perfectly laid out the way you might find in London or in New York or in Sydney. And that's why I think that this 1.5 world approach is definitely something that you should consider if you're trying to get into the nomad capitalist game, but you're a little bit afraid of going somewhere that's not going to be as developed and where you're not going to have all the things that you want. 1.5 world gives you that without the price tag of London, New York, or Singapore. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist. I wrote this book, which you can find on Amazon, to distill a lot of the stuff we talk about in these videos and a lot of the stuff I've learned over the last decade plus traveling all around the world, teaching you about how to legally reduce your taxes, build your personal freedom, and create wealth faster. Definitely get a copy of this book if you want to learn more. Now, if you want to watch more videos, make sure you subscribe to our channel and make sure you click the notifications bell so you never miss one of our new videos with more tips on how to go where you're treated best. And if you're already a 6- or 7-figure entrepreneur and you'd like to put these strategies in place for yourself, go to nomadcapitalist.com and learn about how I can help you.